Okay, welcome everyone to the next MStranslate Google Hangout. Tonight we're going to have a slightly different format to some of the previous Hangouts that we've had, and this is going to start off as a bit more of a one-on-one interview with myself and Teisha, and hopefully along the way we're going to have a few people drop in and ask us questions. If you're watching live and have questions, feel free to contact MStranslate on Twitter or on Facebook, and we'll read out the questions as we go along. You can also email any questions you have through to me at brett@mstranslate.com.au, and I'll be monitoring that and read out questions that we have. In saying that, the people dropping in to join us, Andrew's just dropped in to join us now, so there we go. Hi Andrew, welcome. We're now broadcasting live, so I'm just giving the introduction and then we'll hand over to Teisha, and there'll be opportunities for you to ask questions as we go along. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Teisha Rose. Teisha's the author of a new book called Life Interrupted. And I won't tell you too much about the book, I'll leave that for Teisha to do. But the book really is a book in two parts. The first part detailing Teisha's journey since being diagnosed with MS at the age of 22. And the second part talking about her health framework, which she developed to deal with challenges she experienced in her life, but more broadly for anyone to help them deal with challenges that may arise in their life. So, as I said, Teisha, I'll now hand over to you, and if you want to give an introduction to yourself and the book, we'll go from there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Brett. And Brett's right, I've recently published a book called Life Interrupted, My Journey from Hurdle to Hope. The book is at the moment available as an ebook, but in the next couple of months will be available as paperback as well, which is exciting. I'd never written a book before. I never thought I would write a book, but over the years I've certainly been encouraged to share my story because I've had some pretty debilitating lows since I was diagnosed with MS, some pretty aggressive relapses, but I've also had some incredible experiences. So I was wanting, hey guys, I was wanting to share my story with MS, but I also wanted it to be more than a life story. And the challenge for me was to write a book which provided insights into my journey that explored, I guess, behind the story and explored why it was that, and why it is, my life and my response to MS has evolved so much over the years. So part one is that novelization, and I'm openly and honestly go through all the lows, which was quite confronting to do, and my friends will know that I've been quite private in my journey with MS, but I thought it was really necessary to be open and frank about the dark periods, because it's those dark periods where I found that I really grew and evolved from. And then with part two, I put together this framework, which I'm not sure whether you've seen on the link on my website, which is health. And health represents the stages I've navigated through since being diagnosed. And it came to me after a relapse I had in 2012, because after the relapse I realised on the surface my experience was very similar. I was back in a wheelchair, back having problems with vision, I was back in rehab, but behind the scenes I felt different, and I wanted to try and make sense of that evolution. So that's when health came to me one afternoon. So I'll go quickly through health and explain. I won't go into the details at this stage of all my insights with the framework, but I'll use health to give you a bit more of an insight into my journey with MS. And then I'd be interested to hearing from others as well as to what stages of health resonate with you, and what insights you've had on your journey as well. And I guess from the outset though, I want to make it really clear and really emphasise that I'm not proposing health as some theory or some self-development plan that if you follow these stages, you know, you hit a hurdle, follow these 6 steps and you will reach hope. For me, it was just a means of me making sense of my journey and making sense of how much I've changed over the years. So, and also with health, it's not a one-off. You know, we know with MS that there's lots of hurdles that interrupt our lives. There's lots of different relapses which present new and different and varied challenges that we need to go through. And even when you're living with MS, that's not the only hurdle that's going to interrupt your life. There's other things, part of our lives, which will present challenges. But for me, what was good about health is that the more I navigated my way through different relapses, different hurdles, the more insights I gained and the better I got at dealing with the hurdle and keeping on moving forward. And I guess the main ingredient that I talk about with the health framework is momentum, is moving forward. So when people read my book, read my story, read about my insights, I really want to emphasise that I don't want people getting stuck on the detail, that certain experiences I have, certain insights I have are my lessons that I have learnt, and you might have totally different lessons. Some of the stages mightn't be applicable to your journey, and I just don't want people to get caught on that. Rather, the challenge of health and what health can really do is, you're right, what health can really do is encourage you to start a conversation, start engaging with your own journey, start thinking about where you've come and where you can go and how you can move forward. Okay, so any questions yet, or we're all good?
I mean, I have a very general question.
Yes.
From someone coming completely out of this sphere, obviously, and so, I mean, I don't share any of those experiences, but I know one thing that we hear a lot through what we do at MStranslate is the notion that you've already brought up about sharing your experiences and being open with your experiences versus trying to keep everything private and keep to yourself. Obviously, writing a book about it, you can't really share more than that in terms of being open about everything. Did you find it helpful? Did you find that you viewed everything a lot more differently having written it down? And I guess this question then, I mean, after Teisha answers, this question applies to Andrew and Tony, and even Brad as well, in terms of how you feel about this notion of sharing with people about your experiences.
Yeah, I found it really cathartic, and I didn't think I would. And I think it was good for me also to have confidence that, yes, I've got through some really, really difficult periods, and that gives me then confidence of dealing with anything that comes along in our life. And it's funny because writing, I still don't particularly chat to friends and all and just talk about, you know, what I'm going through MS, and I don't want to be that the basis for conversation and interaction with people. I'm quite happy for it not to be the focus, but I just think the more open I could be writing about my story, the more confidence it could give people that you can go through, you know, the dark periods and you can come through them. So I just thought, I felt almost obliged that I didn't want to just gloss over those periods, because I just think the realities of living with MS can be really dark at times, but really good things can happen as well.
Teisha, just a quick question from Andrew. First of all, thank you for sharing today. I appreciate it a great deal. Teisha, I wonder whether you had a view of yourself as a person who, I'm going to use a word I don't like that much, but copes well with things like the challenges of MS, whether you had that view of yourself, and whether now, having written about it, whether you have a different view of yourself.
Yeah, and I always did cope pretty well with challenges in my own sort of way. I certainly deal with it differently now. I think I was a lot more inward in coping with it and really blocking everything out and just solely focusing on MS for a long time. I think what surprised me as I was writing about it was my response, like going overseas by myself. 2000, I had this horrendous relapse and I still could hardly walk. And I, travelled by myself for a year. And I look back at that and think, gosh, that was gutsy. I'm writing about things like that. I'm surprised I did that. I'm pleased I did that. And I think now, gosh, I don't know whether I have the guts to do that now. But I think for me, my motivation was always to raise the bar. So, I could prove to myself I could. So then next time I could do something else. So I think, and I do think that when, different adversities happen, you do naturally fall into your natural way of dealing with adversity. And it's, so I guess the answer to your question is yes, definitely I was always up for a challenge, but I've surprised myself sometimes.
Thank you.
Tony or Brad, do you guys have any questions you want to share before? Welcome, by the way. I didn't get a chance to welcome you guys at the start.
Firstly, we need to apologise. We're having severe technical problems here.
That's okay.
Firstly, hi Teisha, and thank you for sharing. I need to be transparent and admit that I'm a psychologist and I have a master's degree in health psychology. Mm-hmm. So my interest is very much in coordinating the Macedon MS support group, because I understand and completely support the idea of sharing your experiences. So it's fabulous hearing your story about how positive and empowering sharing has been for you. And just confronting a lot of the challenges and difficulties, which a lot of people in my past have been able to do in the client's chair, in the psychologist setting. So it all is the world tipping on its head for me, because after 20 years of being a psychologist, I'm now in a position where I probably should go and see one. Or I should find a mechanism such as the one you are describing now, which you have found so valuable, to get all of these barriers and hurdles and challenges and learning, and the good things as well as the bad, are really good to get out and discuss with other people. It has been completely fascinating to see how different people in our group choose to share or not share. And that's always different. As you say, it's not a step-by-step approach for everybody. Some people go right out on a limb sharing a lot and then come back and hibernate for a bit and share nothing. And it's just really gorgeous to see how other members of the group want to be available to help other people engage in sharing. It's really empowering just to see that happen. Would you say so, Brad? Yeah, having somebody who's always there with me, that is Brad, who can see this from a non-psychologist perspective is really valuable. So I'd like to ask Brad what he thinks and stop rabbiting on so everybody else.
No, it's good.
Straight in the hot seat. All right. Hi. Yeah, it is fascinating to go along and see the different guys and girls with MS get together, and to see how the group has evolved since it started, and particularly as people become more friendly or intimate with each other, that comfort opens the doors and allows, let's say, meaningful conversations. With MS being particularly, as you know, such a private disease in a lot of ways, that, just seeing that it takes a while for that to unlock the different people, and I think having an environment that has, how would you sum it up, a relative independence. There's no fear or favour, there's no influence. Tony organises lots of guest speakers, and Brett's been out a few times, and that's really great. And people get a big buzz out of that, but it's interesting that they get almost as big a buzz out of just our coffee cake catch-ups. Particularly, I think we missed one we had a break over that Christmas period to avoid the really hot time. So people had gone, I think, 2 months without seeing each other, and
lots to catch up on.
There was a lot of herding of cats and trying to bring them under control when they got together. It was incredible, the noise of everyone just sharing, catching up, and really good to see. So I certainly can't say enough positive things about the methodologies of sharing that information, and I suppose finding, as you referred to, that comfortable zone, the happy place to go to share those things.
Yeah, no, I think it is important. And I guess what I wanted to get out of the health framework as well is some sort of focus as well of sharing, but sharing in a way that moves forward and not a way that keeps you standing still. And that's what I really hope that I can achieve through health, is to start those conversations, but in a meaningful way as well, to challenge us to start thinking about our journeys differently, our own journeys, and then gaining information about other people's journeys as well. And the framework as well, and I've set up the website Lives Interrupted and the Facebook page, because really in recognition that we all, experience hurdles that interrupt our lives, and we can gain so much insight from each other to move forward. So whether that's MS or whether that's another illness or whatever the hurdle may be, we can learn from each other. So, I agree, sharing is fantastic, and especially if it's harnessed, in a way to gain insights and learn from each other.
Yeah, and I think Andrew brought up an interesting point earlier when he talked about coping, and how well do you think you cope with things. I'm sort of interested to know whether the health framework started as being part of a coping mechanism, giving you a way of being able to cope with everything that you were going through. But obviously, as you say, now it goes well beyond just coping, and wanting to actually get into a much better place. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I guess now that I went through a lot of life-changing decisions in 2012, and as I was putting together health, I sort of tested it out on myself, and it did help me navigate through those, decisions. But what I found earlier on in my journey was that I was really stuck in the first 3 phases of hurdle, engagement, agitation, and I was stuck in this cycle. And then it took me a few years to let go, and then it took me even longer to really make some significant changes. So I don't know whether we want to sort of backpedal a little bit and I go through what those stages are, and that will sort of show then, I guess, the shift in how I have coped, because I didn't do it so well at the beginning. So are you happy, everyone, if I quickly go through how health came to be in relation to my story?
Yeah, definitely.
Yep, okay. So H is the hurdle, and for me, diagnosed with MS at 22 was totally out of left field, totally unexpected. I didn't even have a GP to chat about my diagnosis with. I just finished uni, I was living in the city, Melbourne. I just started on the graduate program at Telstra, so I had all of these plans, and MS was not part of my plan. And then I had quite a few relapses in the first few years, not particularly bad, but bad enough to 2 or 3 times have to go to hospital a year just for some steroid infusions to get my legs going again. I found my life, and the E is engagement, because during that period I found that my life was pretty much consumed by MS. I was really preoccupied with the functioning of my body. I was scared that another relapse would happen, so I was really so highly attuned to any changes in the status quo. So the leg was a little bit weaker, if I had tingling in a hand or on my nose or anything, I went into almost panic mode, worried that another relapse was imminent. So, and even when you're in that hospital environment as well, it's really hard to detach yourself from MS. You almost feel, like you are the disease in that environment. Then I became agitated, which is the A, because I had all of these plans. My career was going great, and I was getting promotions and all, but MS was interfering with me trying to live out the life I wanted to lead. I was travelling in the state each week for work. I was in a training position, so I was trying to be up front facilitating training courses every day. MS was making my life difficult, and I was getting more and more frustrated. So I equate those first 3 stages as really being that dark period of MS, and I couldn't work out how to let that go, because I didn't want to change my life, but each time I kept pressing forward with my career, each time I kept pushing myself, I kept getting sick, I kept ending up back in hospital. And sometimes I actually liked the week off in hospital, because it gave me some time to re-energise, to get back to what I was doing again. A few smiles.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've heard this story before.
But the lightness comes, it comes. So then it came to the next stage of letting go, and that was forced upon me. In 2000, I had my worst relapse ever. I woke up in the middle of the night and I was paralysed down one side, and I couldn't move, and the other side I just couldn't feel. So I got myself to hospital, got a lift to hospital, and I spent weeks and weeks and weeks in hospital. And initially for the first few weeks, I was totally, bed bound. I had to negotiate a bedpan. Like it was awful, and it was, disempowering, and all of those adjectives. It was just a really dark time. And I was frightened, that I would never walk again, and not be able to get out of bed again. And I then, during that period, again, my entire focus was MS and trying to get better, but it put life in perspective, because I kept thinking, really, is working at Telstra is facilitating customer service programs, is that really worth getting this sick over? You know, so that period of time in hospital and being surrounded by people going through their own journeys, I kept thinking, it kept putting MS and life into perspective. And I know I fought really hard for months and months to get out of hospital, to get back to my life. And I just remember sitting back at my computer at work thinking again, really? You know, again, is this worth, you know, getting sick for? And I decided it wasn't. But instead of, you know, risking another relapse because I was spent and I just didn't want to risk getting sick again, I thought, well, let's find a more enjoyable way of not falling into the same traps. And that's when I decided to pack up and go over, and I lived in Scotland for the year, which was, you know, an amazing experience. But I became really good at letting go, putting life in perspective, you know, trying to prioritise my health and well-being, but I kept getting sick. You know, I came back from Scotland, I retrained as a social worker, so I can, you know, relate to working with clients and going through their things. I worked with little kids from broken families at the Salvos. I then worked within the housing sector, working with people who are experiencing homelessness. So again, my world opened up, which also helped put MS into perspective. But I kept getting sick. 2003, again, I had a really bad relapse. I was back in hospital. I couldn't use my hands, which was challenging. I couldn't use my legs. I was in a wheelchair again. But I got back, felt better, thought I need another overseas journey. And this time I ended up volunteering in Romania with World Vision, which was, again, another opportunity to put MS and life into perspective. But 2 years on, I came back, worked as a social worker, again had really aggressive relapses. So, Brett, back to your question in terms of how I've learnt to cope, I was still experiencing so many relapses for that 10-year period from 97 through to about 2007. And I thought, you know, enough. I just can't live the rest of my life going through just, you know, countless relapses, and they were getting, you know, more and more severe, and I didn't have the energy. So it was at that point where the stage of taking time, and I didn't realise it at the time, but I really started looking at life differently. And we moved down to the beach for a little while, down to the Bellarine Peninsula, which, you know, I moved back and forth a bit, but that's where we're living now. And I really started the journey of taking time out to learn more about myself, to explore different options, to maximise my health and well-being, to really start reflecting on my journey and thinking, well, how can I view MS and my life differently? And I certainly share part of that journey of self-discovery in my book. And it's, I certainly don't want to share in the book that you need to do A, B, and C in your own journey of self-discovery, but I really think for me it was paramount to stop just focusing on the relapses and start focusing on myself and how I deal with a life with this disease. So for me, taking time was the key, and that was the time where all of these ideas that I put in the book sort of came to fruition. And for me, it was the start of actually living a healthier life. And then the H is hope, because now I can honestly say that I'm not living in fear of MS. You know, an MRI confirms I still have MS, but it's not in my mind constantly. You know, I'm not defined by MS at all anymore. I often go, you know, days without thinking about it unless, you know, I try and walk for long distance or anything like that. So that's the acronym of health, and it really does follow through the reality of the stages that I've navigated through on my journey, but I also use it whenever I need to sort of check in with myself as to where I am on the continuum and what I need to do to keep moving so my life isn't filled with frustration, but it does hopefully have a lot more lightness in it. So there you go. There's health.
Yeah, thanks, Teisha. I mean, it's a really amazing thing to share and a really good framework that you've built. I guess my question, and probably your question from the conversations we've had leading into this, is now to I guess Tony and Brad and Andrew as to how does the health framework resonate with you in terms of your experiences? Do you have something similar? Does certain parts of health sort of correlate with things that you've gone through? Do you have different ideas about parts of it?
Oh, gosh, that's a difficult one for me because I absolutely understand and can see how, Teisha, how you've moved through the health model, and I think it's a fantastic framework that you have used. What happens for me, having worked in this field for so long, I'm getting old and crusty, is so many different models come to my head and so many different theories and so many different strategies and ideas. And as you would know from being in the field of social work, when you're meeting with a client, your brain is operating on so many different levels, including thinking, what strategy do I think would work for this person? What strategy do I think would work for me? And that changes. So for some people, one type of strategy would be potentially fabulous, but it's not going to work for the rest of every other person who comes along. However, having said that, listening to your framework and how you described it as, first of all, I think it was the 3 initial phases that were very much about understanding and acknowledging and experiencing before you then moved on to the more positive steps that would help you deal with the condition as you saw fit as the best strategy. I think that is fabulous, and that does in fact wrap up a whole world of health psychology in one gorgeous word. I think you've done a really good job.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess what I really want, and that's what I said at the beginning, I don't want to present it, as a theory in terms of, and I certainly won't, because when I studied originally, did a degree in psychology as well, back 20 years ago or whatever, and I had a psychologist read through the draft and all that I did, and she was saying, all different theories and all, and I said, I'm not wanting to create a theory, because I just want it to encourage people to think about their own journey and the stages that they've gone through. And that's what I say in the book, think of your own acronym. Mine happens to be health, but some of those stages mightn't be applicable to your journey. Maybe you haven't felt agitated, or maybe, letting go, it hasn't happened for you yet, or maybe you don't want it to happen, or maybe, there's so many variables. But I think the most important thing is to engage with it, to question it, and to try and work out which bits resonate, which bits don't, and where you've gone. And for me too, it's not just the story of the stages, and in the book, for each stage I share about 6, 7, 8 different insights for each of those stages, because that's where we evolve, and that's how we can change our response and learn from our experiences.
Yeah.
Andrew, do you have a comment?
Yeah, thanks, Brett. I think I really like your model, and thank you again for sharing it. I think it's really helpful I've just brought it up on my iPad as your website, so it's good for me to reflect on it. And I think, in a sense, I've been 22 odd years since diagnosis, and in some sense I view MS as my second career, and I've been there in a positive way, in that I think it's taken me probably the majority of that 22 years to kind of figure out what I need to put around me that works and what I need to get out of the way that doesn't work. And I still, to this day, I had a relapse a couple of weeks ago, and you go through off I went for methylpred and all the rest of it, and I'm not terribly patient, so I was getting very wound up about this is not good, and it's interrupting all the things that I need to do, and I need to hurry up, and all those emotions that I'm sure that we all share. And now, a week or 10 days down the track, things have levelled off very nicely. The prednisolone has gone through the not so good stage into the beneficial stage, and I now feel like I'm back in to all the things that I value. And I'm conscious of that, particularly with talking to people that are relatively newly diagnosed, that it is, and I think that's the real value of your model, in that it's important to stand back and say there are going to be moments, and in the context of the long term, what does that mean? What do I learn from it? What do I put in place to help me, be better tomorrow than I am today, and so on. So, it really, your model resonates with me very well. Thank you.
Right, that's good to hear.
Sorry, Brad, did you have a comment? I think I make a habit of every Hangout cutting you off while you're trying to say something.
I'm just slow on the jump. I was just going to add to Teisha's story that, from what I've seen, I think that anything that moves people with MS past that initial 3 stages, as you've described it, is particularly powerful and helpful, because, as you know, you go in, you get your diagnosis, you're like, what the hell's all this about? And you get into that standard medical model, and it's all from my perspective. I think it seems to be very good at locking people in, or putting quite a big wall in front of moving past that third step. That they focus so much on having people looking at, look at your relapse, how many relapses have you had, and and MRIs routinely, and count the lesions, and certain people with MS sort of wear it like a badge of honour, like, I've got 20 lesions, I've got 30. So that really, to my thinking, locks people into that initial 3 stages. So power to the model, power to anything that gets people past that, and to look forward, and I suppose towards that, the positive things that, you've got MS. As we sort of joke, people say, have you had an MRI? Another one, what the hell for? What's it going to tell you? You've got MS. You already know that. So, unless you sort of specifically want to be counting them up or seeing if they've settled down, there's no point often apart from just reinforcing you in those initial stages, I think.
No, I agree. And I used to, early on, like, I was keeping a diary of my symptoms so I could, recognise a pattern and pounce early enough, and then I wouldn't have to have so much time off work, and Whereas now, some days I think, oh yeah, my hand is a bit numb, but whatever, it will come back. Or like, I don't just focus on that. And that's what in engagement I talk about, be careful what you focus on, because if you are just focusing on the symptoms, then I really believe now that that's almost what you're attracting more, as opposed to not giving that energy. And that's not to say, if I'm stumbling around, can't walk or whatever, then I'd call my neurologist. But it's just not giving the naming or giving energy to all of the little things that really, at the end of the day, come and go, and it doesn't really matter. And that's how I say it now, anyway.
It's funny you mentioned the diary. I remember probably numerous of the pharmaceutical companies, as part of being on their product, they supply you a very snazzy, glossy diary to fit in.
Yeah, no, I've had them.
Okay, well, we might start to bring this to a close a little bit to give Teisha the rest of the night off. But if anyone's got any final questions, we'll take those now, and then make some final comments. One question from me, actually. One question, two parts, possibly. Do you think, with the health framework, is the hardest part recognizing where you're at in those steps, in terms of, you've got something going on and you're not feeling right, that something's bothering you, but you can't tell whether that's the hurdle or whether it's agitation? Is it working out that part of it, or is it, even if you know what part it is, getting from that into the next stage? That's sort of the first part of the question. And the second part is, now having developed the framework, do you find that you can go from hurdle to hope quicker than I guess you used to?
Yeah. I recognise now, out of practice, where I'm at. And I think what's good about it as well is it promotes self-talk, to really be in tune with how you're feeling, as opposed to being in tune with your symptoms. So I think that's good, because you're more aware of your emotions. But I often say that in theory, I know that letting go is a really good idea, but that's pretty hard sometimes, because you get stuck. And we do, regardless of MS, you get stuck into the nuances of day-to-day life. You get stuck. We all live on automatic pilot, that we're not aware really of what's not conducive to our health and well-being. So in theory, I know, letting go is needed. And often I wouldn't let go until I ended up in hospital with a relapse. And then I think, oh, I need some changes in my life. Whereas now, I don't need those relapses to think, nah, things aren't sitting right. I really need to reassess what's important, and I need to make sure that my life is conducive to my well-being. And I guess the stage, and I think the most important stage for me, is the taking time one, because that's the one where I talk about the importance of quietening your mind, which I think is really important, so you're more aware of what's going on around you. I also talk about taking time to actively participate in your life. So whether that's actively having more awareness of, what you're eating, or actively being involved physically in doing exercise, or just questioning and being aware of the decisions you're making. And then I guess for me, the key, and what I'm trying to do all the time, is bringing to the surface the decisions I'm making and why. And if I am hesitant of making changes, asking myself why I am, or if I'm pushing myself to the extreme at work, questioning what's behind that. So what I've enjoyed about the framework is I feel more involved in my journey. I no longer feel like I'm going along waiting for the next relapse, waiting for the next hurdle. I feel like I can influence it a little bit. So I think, does that answer your questions?
Yeah, definitely.
Good.
Okay, Tony and Brad, do you guys have any last questions or comments before we finish up? I promise I won't cut you off, Brad.
I don't. No, I think I'm all right. It's caused enough trouble.
Yeah, I don't have any further questions. I would just like to say thank you very much, Teisha.
You're welcome.
Andrew, any last questions or comments from you?
Yes, if I might, Brett. There's a little phrase sitting in my head which is build a bridge and get over it. And what I'm thinking about is what opportunity exists to help people build their own model, to build their own bridge, if you like. And I think, I reflect back on my journey, and Teisha, this has been inspirational in that regard to help me, to think back about it. And I think gradually over time, I've built a model that works for me.
Yeah, great.
And I wonder if there isn't an opportunity, and again, I know, Brett, it comes back to scarce research dollars and things like that, but looks at drawing on loads of people's experiences with MS and how they've built their own model and how that's helped them to live successful lives over a long period of time and fulfilling lives. And when I see a bit on Facebook, there's some accounts that are accounts for people to go with MS and seek support and ask questions and things like that. And I go to forums where people are at, and you see this wide divergence in how people are travelling. And I wonder if both of you may have a comment, Teisha, and Brad, as to whether you have a comment about, is there an opportunity there that extends the knowledge of people to help them put together their own model that builds a life for them that is really more positive than negative despite their MS experience?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that people, and this is my experience even on, I mean, I've only been on Facebook a few months, that people though are hesitant, to share. And what I'm wanting to do is, and part of, the whole Lives Interrupted website, and eventually I want to, run workshops and all under that banner, is to encourage people to share what works, what doesn't work, because I think what's really hard about letting go is that we're surrounded by sameness. We're surrounded by like-minded people a lot of the time, and we're not open to different ways of viewing and experiencing our lives. So you're right, I think there needs to be a forum, and we need to encourage more people to start thinking about their journeys and start sharing about what has worked, what hasn't worked, provide a bit of a shortcut for others going through the same things. And I think even when people are diagnosed, that's just as important as giving a book like I received on all the symptoms that may or may not be part of my future. Strategies on coping would have saved a lot of angst in my life. So, yeah, I think there's definitely, but in what forum or what, medium to get that out there, I'm not sure, but we need to encourage somehow more people, talking and sharing, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I have 2 points to make on that. One, I think it's funny how similar this is to my views on how research needs to act at the moment. And I know, Andrew, you and I have had these conversations before, and especially when it comes to MS, it's that, and it comes back to what you said, Teisha, about sameness. When you're doing research and you're in the lab, you've got your own little niche and your own little area that you're focused on, and you might talk to people in a similar sort of niche but really, I think we're at a stage now, and finally people are really starting to understand that if we want to make connections and get answers to really make progress in MS, that these different niches need to start talking to each other, and that, you know, in genetics, talking to immunologists, talking to physiologists, talking to neurologists and clinicians, and even beyond that, it's people researching MS need to talk to people researching Alzheimer's and people researching Parkinson's, and we need to start forming these networks. And I think it's exactly the same when it comes to other research and other development breakthroughs, and that's the same in terms of how do you go about living day to day with MS. And it's always been a really key component of why MStranslate was formed. You know, it's not there just to provide research updates. While that's, you know, obviously a key concept of what we do, we really hope that it becomes a place where people can come and share and talk about research, but also talk about their own experiences. But it is a constant struggle. It's not an easy thing to get people to do, and that's why nights like tonight are fantastic, to have people come and do that. Are there better ways that we can do it? You know, we're constantly looking at new and exciting ways that we can move forward, and maybe it means that the five of us need to sit down over coffee and come up with a better way that maybe MStranslate can move forward, or you know, offshoot that we can look at to better handle this side of it. Because I do think it's just as important as everything else. Okay, well, on that note, and with Ralph joining us at kind of bad time, because we're just about to finish up, I just want to finish by saying thank you to Teisha for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to everyone and share your insights into your journey. Tony, Brad, Andrew, Emily, thank you again for joining us on another Hangout and sharing your experiences. And yeah, hopefully this is the start of something new, and maybe something that we can look at extending and expanding to benefit lots of people.
Sounds good. Well, thank you. Thanks, Brett, for the opportunity. And thank you, Andrew, Tony and Brad, for joining in. I appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully we can, you've got my website, so make contact, and I'd love to hear more of your thoughts as well moving forward, because that's really what I want to achieve through writing the book. Wasn't just to share my story, but to gain other people's insights and see how we can help others moving forward as well. And like Brett was saying, I think what I want to achieve as well with Lives Interrupted is learning from people dealing with other illnesses. You know, what are they doing to help move themselves forward? So it's not just about MS and anything that, you know, interrupts what they're doing in their lives, because I really believe that we can, you know, learn from each other. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk soon.
Thanks again.
Thank
you. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Bye.